Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For the next session, we'll be dwelling into the world of machine learning with the topic, Turbocharge your ML with open data. Our esteemed speaker for the next session is Tom. He's a data geek with experience in data engineering, data science, and machine learning. He's currently the head of data science at Station 10. Please join me in welcoming Tom to the stage.
Thank you. It always makes me laugh when someone refers to me as esteemed. I don't feel that way about myself. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Ewing. I'm here to tell you how you can turbocharge your machine learning with open data. Firstly, I'm sorry about the clickbaity title. It was the last, for those of you who are regulars at Data Science Festival, my last presentation was called, I think, something like Turbocharge Your Workflow or something like that. And I was too lazy to think of a new title, so I just put machine learning with open data on the end. Apologies. You can also turbocharge your analytics and BI as well. So we're not just solely focusing on machine learning, but this isn't the Analytics and BI Festival. So whilst we will touch on those, we're going to be focusing more on the kind of AI elements. And the last thing I would say is I wouldn't classify myself as an expert in open data, but I have spent the past year working with it, for better or worse. So hopefully I've got some insights and useful information to share. So in terms of what we're going to do, we're going to have a brief introduction to me, to Station 10, that kind of thing. I'm going to give you a crash course in UK open data. We're going to go through some use cases, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of open data in the UK. So in terms of the introduction, that's me. I'm Tom Ewing. I'm head of AI and data engineering at Station 10. That photo is actually generated by AI because I don't have a decent headshot of myself. And when you put it on a big screen, it becomes obvious. So I wanted to just address that elephant in the room. I'm giving my age away a little bit, but I've got 20 years experience of working with data. And I don't often make the best career choices. So I've worked lots of places. To give you an example, I took a role with a company that required, the success of the company required people to be able to meet in large groups, and I started that role about 4 weeks before COVID, which is that's my luck when it comes to picking roles. So that means I've had quite a varied career. And the last thing I would say is I'm a long-time Data Science Festival attendee and contributor. If you've been here more than once, you might have seen me before. I think for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been involved in some capacity with Data Science Festival, the events. I think it's a great community. I love the events, the people, and the organisers as well. So that's a little bit about me. In terms of the company I work for, I work for a company called Station 10. We are a consultancy, and we specialise in website analytics and marketing. The name Station 10 comes from the code name for the code breakers at Bletchley Park in World War II. So as you can imagine, we're all a bunch of massive geeks. And we've made open data a big part of what we do in Station 10, particularly over the last year. And we've been able to add significant value to our clients. So if you want to know more about, I'm always up for a chat about open data, sources, that kind of thing. So please give me a shout on LinkedIn if you want to chat more about it. In terms of the presentation, a consistent theme in my career has been everywhere I've gone, because I've worked in government, I knew about the work that goes into the census, what data is available, the statistical releases that are released. I've asked the question about what about open data, why aren't we using it? And not every one of the companies has been interested in that. There are a lot of good reasons for that, and that's why I call it a warts and all presentation. But I do believe that open data can add value to what we do, particularly in these times where we're starting to see more regulation and interest in AI. So we're going to be going through where you can get it, the kinds of things what kinds of things are in it, and the kinds of things that you can do with it. But first, we're going to have a crash course in UK open geodemographic data and statistical geography. And I'll start with the question. So if we can get show of hands, if I put you on the spot, could you tell me the difference between Great Britain and the UK? Well, there's a guy over there, he's got a smile on his face. He knows, you know the difference, don't you? Okay, so we're going to have just a short primer. So this is part one of the statistical geography lesson. So Great Britain is the island upon where we find England, Scotland, and Wales. Sometimes the usage will also include the island, like for example, the Scottish Islands, the Welsh Islands, and so on. The United Kingdom is England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and the British Isles is all three of them together. And it's important to understand that because in the UK, statistical production is devolved, which means that it has separate authorities responsible for producing statistics in, and indeed open data, in the various countries. But the flip side to that is that business isn't devolved, so generally the UK is a homogenous market. And that introduces complexity, which we'll cover later. So in terms of where you can get open data, the top three, so we've got nine sources here. The top three relate to the statistical authorities. For England and Wales, for ONS, NERSA, the Authority for NI, and National Records of Scotland are responsible for Scotland. Generally speaking, if you're going to go anywhere, I would have a look at ONS first. They produce statistics and census data for England and Wales, but they also produce some data for Great Britain, which includes Scotland, and UK. So that's generally, if you're looking for some data or see what's available, the ONS website is a good bet. The other authorities, NERSA and Scotland, tend to produce stuff that's only applicable to their particular countries. The second row, the Open Geography portal, that's an excellent place to go if you're interested in making maps and boundaries and hierarchies as well. That's generally a good source for that. And data, you've all heard of datagov.uk. I don't know if anyone's used it, but essentially it doesn't have, the search function is broken on there and has been for some time. So yeah, you won't find anything you need. I only mention it because when you think open data in the UK, you think, oh yeah, open data, data.gov.uk, but it's not, it's not really usable. In their defense, you have Google Dataset Search now, which is a lot better anyway. And the Met Office, now for what we see with a lot of retailers, they're very interested in weather data. And the Met Office actually have an API that gives you hourly weather data for the 200 weather stations in the UK. It's fantastic. No one knows about it because they don't market it. So you can actually scrape that and start to build history. The bad news is that they're retiring that in March 25 and it will be replaced by a paid service. So that will cease to be open data. And again, this is something I only found out yesterday when I was double checking it. The bottom three are more kind of niche-y, I wouldn't say niche data sources, but I've included Open Data Scotland because it's a wonderful resource. It's everything that data.gov.uk isn't. It's really easily searchable. You can find, you can view, browse by category, you can search and so on. It's got an amazing user experience. The downside is it's only got Scotland's data on there. The middle one, my personal favourite, is the Consumer Data Research Centre, and that focuses a lot on consumer behaviours, but there's a lot of interesting data sets there. If you think around residential mobility, deprivation, synthetic population estimates and that kind of thing, they do a lot of kind of analysis and work on the kind of the core open data to produce stuff that's more valuable. And the last one is BigQuery public data sets, and that's got stuff that's generally useful for things like prototyping and Kaggle-style challenges. Okay, so in the context of this presentation, we're going to be focusing mainly on the census rather than all of the millions of statistical sources. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. So yeah, we're going to focus on that because that's got the most use in terms of for us as machine learning practitioners. So in terms of what data is available, has anyone here used census data, by the way, before? So yeah, we've got a few people who've used it. That's good. Hopefully we'll have a few more by the end of the session. So in terms of the data available, we've got demography, migration, ethnicity, language, and religion, and that becomes really important in the context of AI ethics, which I'll talk a bit about later. Health, housing, work and travel, education. And also some niche stuff around Welsh language, which may be useful, it may not be. I didn't think it was useful until I dealt with a company who were very interested in data in Wales, and it turned out it was. So you never know. And the last one is sexual orientation and gender identity. That's a bit more restrictive in terms of the level of data it's available at. We'll cover more about that later. So the big question, so we've all heard someone say, like early on in my career, my data science career, to try to put together a kind of an AI project. One specific project says, oh, I've got data that can support that particular use case you've got. I think it was air flights data. And I said, great, and we went to all the work of setting up a project and getting the resource for it, getting all the stakeholders involved. And when they actually gave us the data, it wasn't actually data, it was just kind of aggregated statistics, which was pretty useless to us, sorry. It's more the raw low-level data that's more useful for AI algorithms. And the census data has that. So you can see an example with the map of how that shows. Basically, the entire concept of the census is everything is broken down into a homogeneous statistical unit. And it's structured in such a way to make those units comparable with one another. Again, they're not directly comparable, so we can't have all the units exactly the same. But when you convert things to deciles and percentiles, as you can see from the map, which shows long-term unemployment, you can start to create comparisons. So in this picture, for example, we can see here, so this is actually unemployment in Wales. The yellow areas are the higher employment, and we can see there's an area, I don't know how many people are familiar with Wales, but you've got the area around Port Talbot to Merthyr Tydfil with an area of higher unemployment. And once you know that, you can start to kind of, when I work primarily in marketing, that might be an area that you might want to avoid if you're marketing sports cars, but it might be of an area of interest if you're a job site. So in terms of what the statistical units are and what they look like, so we've got 3 examples here, and these are all the statistical kind of units I'm talking about. They're called output area / data zone is the lowest area, then lower super output area, then middle super output area. And they grow in size. I'm not going to read all the data out below it. And the principle behind using census data for marketing and business is that these little distinct geographical units, they share characteristics, and their populations will share certain characteristics. So, for example, for me, I live in an apartment block in southeast London. It's a 4-minute walk to the nearest train station, which has a 15-minute journey time to London Bridge. And I don't want to say it's affordable because no housing in London is really affordable anymore, but it's slightly more affordable, and it has good schools and a park next door. And the combination of those factors means that we tend to get younger professional families. So as a result of that, I and my family, we share a lot of characteristics with the other 297 people in our little statistical unit. And those shared characteristics have value to AI algorithms. So you won't be able to tell exactly my exact personal circumstances, but you will be able to infer that I'm probably a young professional, or younger professional, I don't know. I moved in 8 years ago. I'm older than most of the people in the department now. But it's more likely that I'm a professional, and it's more likely that I have a family. Okay, so in terms of how can you map these little statistical geographies to using your data? And the answer is through postcode. So as we've discussed, the census geographic units that they break the UK down into are homogeneous by design. So they'll preserve social, geographic, and infrastructure-based boundaries. So things like rivers, parks, hills, neighbourhoods, and roads, buildings, blocks of flats, etc. It's not like we've drawn the ONS have drawn arbitrary lines to everything. They try to preserve the key characteristics. Now, those are available to map on to postcodes via the National Statistics postcode lookup. It's called the NSPL via a best fit method. A best fit means that it's not perfect. So what you're doing, you're mapping one shape or polygon onto another slightly bigger polygon. And there's obviously accuracy issues in that. If you know the house number as well as the postcode, you can do a more accurate assignment using something like the Google Geolocation API, or if that's quite expensive, if you want something a bit cheaper based upon OpenStreetMap or something like that, you can use the GeoApify API as well. In terms of regional data sources, there's a lot more data available around local authority or regional level. And that has use cases for analytics and BI. The data includes population, age, gender, employment pay, GDP, crime, house prices. So that you've got quite a good mix of data available there. And some sources, for example, population. If you want to know the population for the UK at a regional level, that's very easy to download and actually assign to your data. Cool. So we've kind of gone through where you can get open data and how it's kind of worked out. In terms of some use cases, so we're going to go through these one by one. I've already touched a little bit on open data for BI, but it is a really good starting point. It doesn't have a particularly high bar of entry. If you've got regional breakdowns in your company, chances are you'll be able to kind of merge on the formal statistical regions and local authorities onto it. One of the things I tend to see is that this data is there, it's available, it's relatively easy to use, but we're always so locked into using our kind of platforms. We have all of this data available over here. We write SQL, we pull sources together, we produce outputs. And it doesn't occur to us that we might be able to add value through including things like in population, number of people employed, and so on. So again, there's some good sources there that are reasonably easy to align. And enabling per capita breakdowns. Now, per capita breakdowns, so if you've got, say, you've sold 20,000 widgets in Liverpool and 100,000 widgets in London, which area have you done better in? You won't know until you look at that on a per capita basis. So that's the power of the regional level statistics, a lot more easy to use, and some value for BI. Segmentation and personalization. Anyone here created a clustering algorithm using for people lately? No one, okay. Oh, one person. So multi-billion-dollar companies like Netflix and Amazon, they use personalization extensively, and they've built their entire business on top of it. And you can actually enhance that by combining what you as a company know about your customer, which is your first-party data, and open data to create kind of deeper and more meaningful segments. The other thing I would say is that I talked before about the CDRC website having some quite cool stuff on it, and they've actually pre-created 3 tiers of segments that you can merge on to your data provided through the census data, which does a lot of that work for you. That's stuff that we've certainly been using at Station 10 because it saves us a job, it saves the client money, and it gives us a better output. So that's definitely worth a look. So, okay, who's heard of the cookie apocalypse? Anyone? Or the depreciation of third-party cookies? Okay, yeah. So I work in a kind of a marketing bubble, which means that all of this, when we talk about first-party data, third-party data, cookie apocalypse, it's all, yeah, I know all that. But when you kind of move out of that bubble, there's a lot of people who are perhaps less aware. So the crux of the cookie apocalypse is that ads won't be able to follow you around the web anymore, which I think is a really good thing. It really annoys me when I keep seeing the same ads on every website, everywhere I go. That will stop at some point in 2025. And that means that marketing just got a bit more difficult for a lot of people. And the solution to that, everyone says, oh, the solution is first-party data, which is data to you and I. It just means that when someone says first-party data, it means that the data that your company has learned about an individual. But using that is often habit-based. Companies don't tend to know much about their customers' socioeconomic circumstances, that kind of thing, unless they either buy in or obtain data from another source. And open data is a really good way of doing that. So if you can combine your socioeconomic open data with what you know about your customer, that gives you a fuller picture of what they're doing, and can also reveal things that what I call unknown unknowns, what you don't know, that big area that what you don't know about your customers' habits. And it's also free to a point. I say to a point, but we'll cover that in a little bit later. Geotesting. That's the process of, so anyone heard of geotesting or used it? Yeah, okay. So ASOS did a really good talk, I think, at a data science festival a year ago on geotesting, and it's basically splitting a region up into little parts and performing a treatment in one area and using another area as a control group. I just also wanted to plug the DSF YouTube channel because there's a lot of information, particularly the ASOS talks on that. So open data can actually help that in terms of creating better control and treatment groups. So the more you know about your control and treatment groups, the better you can select for them, and the better you can account for differences within the regions. In terms of has anyone here worked with a kind of bricks and mortar retailer? I don't think anyone does anymore, but in terms of selecting retail locations, three most important things are location, location, location. You might have heard that before, and that's modeled through a Huff model. And that assumes that the probability of a customer visiting is based upon the distance and attractiveness of a store and also their competitors. And again, census data is a really good use case for that. And it can also model factors over and above population, so demographics, socioeconomic data, and also transport. Causal inference. I recently built a causal inference model. It was the first bit of AI that I'd actually done for quite a while. And it was actually for a retailer, and they had a lot of first-party data, so they knew a lot about how their customer interacted with them and their brand, but they didn't know much outside of that. And that caused us a lot of issues in terms of understanding why customers had just suddenly stopped. They might have changed address or whatever, or why some customers spent more than other customers. And again, that's another use case in terms of what you know as a company is one half of the picture. The customer's circumstances, where they live, the socioeconomic status is the other half. And had we had that data available, we would have been able to produce a much more accurate model. Churn modeling. Again, churn models are really common. Generally, you have classification-based churn models where you can use those socioeconomic features to actually improve the accuracy of your model. And Bayesian probability-based models that only take a few, like transaction date and a customer ID to predict the churn. But again, there's uses for open data in both. Again, in highlighting those kind of unknowns around the customer's circumstances. The last one, I would say, is a subject that's particularly close to my heart, and that's AI ethics and fairness. So AI is becoming more regulated. So has anyone actually read up on the UK white paper, pro-innovation? Yeah, only one. I think you need to. You need to read up on that. It contains 5 principles: safety, security, robustness, and the two that relate to us as practitioners are transparency, explainability, and fairness. I'm not saying ignore the other 3, but as practitioners, we're most responsible for those. And the other things we'll say is you need to take care when you're using open data. For example, it's quite easy. So because of the inherent biases and in our society, for example, we know that black people have less educational outcomes and earn less than white people in the UK. If you build a model that uses education, level of education and income, it's highly likely that that model will be discriminatory just because even though you haven't directly used race variables related to race, because there's a correlation between those variables and the variables you've used, it's likely that that model will be discriminatory. So again, open data on itself isn't inherently, it's a tool. You can use it for good. And if you're not careful, you can use it discriminatorily, but also it can be used to identify, quantify, and redress that discrimination as well. And again, one of the other things that bugs me is at the moment, everyone's like, whenever you look at an AI ethics or regulation around AI, everything is done up here. In terms of, I want to know what that means for me as an individual. How do I build my algorithms differently? How can I make sure that my algorithms aren't racist? And we have some models for transparency and explainability, like, for example, SHAP, but we don't have much for fairness. So how can we ensure that our algorithms aren't discriminatory? And it's unreasonable to ask companies to collect that data. If a company asked me for data on my ethnicity and religion, I just wouldn't bother responding. I don't think it's fair that they ask me that. And from the company's perspective, it creates additional security risks, overheads for them, and it also infringes on the customer's right to privacy. So again, we've talked open data is an alternative to that because we know the collections, the communities in which we're at risk from this kind of discrimination. We can start to look at the impacts of those. And there are emerging tools. IBM produced AI Fairness 360 and Microsoft's FairLearn. And they are both kind of low-level tools in Python that you can use alongside open data to identify and mitigate discriminatory algorithms. Okay, so the last section I have is around the state of open data in the UK. So Economist last year said the data is basically unrefined or not sparkling treasure. I think that's a very fair explanation of it. It requires a lot of legwork to actually start using open data at the granular level we need as AI practitioners. That gives the census data in particular quite a high bar of entry. The other issue is that it's complicated. So again, you can see here in the picture, this is the statistical geographic breakdowns for the UK, and there's I think about maybe 70 different ones. There's 70 different ways that the ONS can kind of cut that data up and release it, and there's not really much in the way of standardization, and that makes it difficult. Perhaps the biggest issue is that we do have, because we're devolved, we have 3 statistical administrations. That means 3 times the amount of work to obtain and manage this data and produce a kind of a UK view. And we also saw that each area has its own terminology, its own kind of the ways of making those little units that we've talked about. And also Scotland did its census a year later than England and Wales and Northern Ireland. It's only just releasing results now. So there's a lot of these kinds of things that make it difficult. And when you start to look at the low level, all the questions in all 3 censuses is the same, which is great, but how they've processed the answers is slightly different. So then at that lower level, when you go through, you've got to go through 800 columns and align them. So it quickly becomes difficult, but not impossible. But that said, I do think, certainly from when we've done a lot of that hard work, the results have been really good. We've actually been able to add a lot of value to 2 or 3 of our clients through doing it. Just that little bit of legwork. Cool, so thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Oh.
Hi, thanks Tom for this. It's really enjoyable seeing this subject see the light of day again. I just wanted to say if anybody gets into it, and if your employer or person that you're helping is interested in the Crown dependencies, tax havens, ring them up. They're lovely and they're very, very grateful for the contacts. So that's really helpful as well. I would also say there's the semi-free public data as well. There is nothing wrong if you have a mission with a Freedom of Information request. You can do great, great things for this country by making good Freedom of Information requests. They will give you data with no explanation and no metadata, and you will still see them in court. So big up to the Freedom of Information requests.
On the subject of Crown dependencies, that's the Isle of Man and Channel Islands all have their own statistical authorities as well. It's just, yeah, I've run out of space on the slide. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much.
No problems.
Great presentation. So I work in a company that's got presence around the world, and the general consensus is that open data is way better in most other countries to the UK. So do you know much about other countries' open data, and what kind of things could the UK learn and apply to their own to make it, on par?
I don't know whether it's better. It's certainly better organised. I looked at the German website and the French website, and the German website was amazing. It was so easy to find stuff. The same with the French website. It was a lot easier to use than the UK. I think there's probably a lot that we can learn, and I think in terms of there is the Eurostat as well, and they produce some stuff, but I do think that they could do more in perhaps uniting and combining different countries. I think that would be really valuable to kind of EU PLC.
Thank you.
Have you come across some good open healthcare data?
Open what, sorry?
Healthcare related data. Health and
There is some in the census. Health isn't an area I've explored too much. I think the NHS do produce breakdowns of outcomes and things like that, but I don't think it's to a particularly deep geographical level that we want as AI practitioners. But that said, for things like health that are mainly, if it's more medical kinds of things rather than socioeconomic, there's a lot of data that's being released through places like BigQuery public data sets that might be useful. I know there's a lot of information on there about COVID, and you've got a lot of kind of image data as well from things like X-rays and MRIs and that kind of thing. So it depends upon your use case, basically.
And they're openly available?
Sorry, I think so, yeah. The BigQuery data sets are, yeah.
Yeah, so on that, actually look at universities' repositories. They're open data repositories. That's where you'll find a lot of that data that you're looking for. On the data thing, we've known for a long time that a lot of the open data is just really difficult. And a lot of that comes down to the metadata associated with it. But we don't have agreed standards on it. Like in my own institution, we have different metadata for data repositories within the same institution. Yeah. So how do we address the ongoing issue? And is there anything we can kind of do as a community to kind of twist the arm a little bit?
The two things I would say is, one, it needs government intervention. If you want to have an innovation-based approach in the UK, which the government clearly do, it makes sense to invest a little bit of money in, like the economists say, investing in open data. I think that also there is something the community can do as well. Like if you look at the Open Data Gov Scotland website, it's amazing. It's got a few. I think it's staffed by a team of volunteers who do it. But what they've been able to do with that data is absolutely amazing. And I think there's more. It will require more action like that, but to potentially get the government interested.
So is there almost a call for an ISO standard on metadata?
Yeah, it's not me you need to convince. I think it's the government. And I think politicians, it's improving, but I think politicians need to be a little bit more data literate for that to happen. Eduardo.
Yeah, just following that conversation on health data. Yeah, just quite a lot, some long time ago, mortality data, and it comes from the ONS. And it gives a very good breakdown of figures across the UK, and also has a lot of data about illness. So that's, yeah, it gives a good breakdown on the health of the UK as well.
Hi.
Hello.
First of all, thank you for the great presentation. So we have the features created using open data, and we have existing ML models. Mm-hmm. And particularly for geospatial features, have you come across any techniques or have you used any techniques to prove that it adds value to machine learning models?
I think there's two ways. So you can either look at in terms of the feature importance, or through SHAP would be the best way to do that, I would think. The other thing I would say is that there's ethical values that you can add through things like fair learn as well, by actually looking at if your algorithm is going to impact communities or people. I think using that needs to become a lot more widespread.
Hi. Recently, I've been looking at some study of using the UK petition website as like an open data source, because you click on that, you see like the number of people who signed that petition in that region, okay, or whatsoever. Yeah. So, just want you to like comment on like what's your opinion of these data. I mean, can it be usable? I mean, because it can be very subjective, or.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's more of a. I mean, there's first a legal issue where you can scrape that data, which I think it's generally accepted now that web scraping is okay. But in terms of, use cases for that data, I would think that would be more straying into large language model kind of territory and NLP territory, which isn't really what I'm good at. So I'm not sure I can answer that very well. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, thank you, Tom, for such an incredible session.